As the school curriculum becomes squeezed, many subjects get eased aside. One of those, I'm afraid, is often poetry. A lot of people think, well, so what, poetry is useless. No, it's not. Think about it. Poems can often be written in very few lines, using very few words. But in those words and lines you can explore all sorts of emotions very privately. And you can edit them and think about them, and you can really work through your own feelings through the medium of a poem. Now then, I was working some time ago with a particularly good Year 5 class whose teacher did read quite a bit of poetry to the children and asked them to read some poetry as well. She built it into the English curriculum. And that gave me an idea. So for that class I wrote this poem. The name I use is not the name of that teacher. Mrs. Jenkins asks a question. Mrs. Jenkins entered the room and stood in front of her class. Good morning, children. Before we begin, there's a question I'd like to ask. How many of you like poems? How many know what poetry is? Put your hands up if you know. Don't worry. It's not a test or a quiz. There was a moment's silence, and then, Poems is really soft, miss, said Martin Barber, looking bored. Poems must always rhyme, miss, said David Smith. You need to score as many rhymes as you possibly can, and then add loads more. That's my plan. Other hands slowly went up. This was all a very good sign. Poems don't have to rhyme, miss. You just stick one idea on each line. I wrote a poem like that, said Sally. Teacher ticked it and said it was fine. Poems are about all sorts, miss, or they tell stories or make you giggle. Then Mrs. Jenkins noticed Megan sitting on the floor quietly in the middle. She looked really worried, as if struggling to solve a riddle. Megan saw that Mrs. Jenkins was looking, so she smiled. She put up her hand. Excuse me, miss, for saying this, but I don't think you understand. We can't answer that question, miss. Your question isn't fair. Poems can be hard, soft, light or dark, or as transparent as invisible air. Some poems sound like a dance. Some of them sing in your head like a song. Others have no rhythm at all, but their ideas are what carry you along. Poems can be fire in the rain, or a feather or a razor-sharp knife. There's no such thing as a poem, miss. They're just special ways to think about life. There was another moment's silence, and then Mrs. Jenkins didn't know what to say. Megan's answer is right, she said. Perhaps I'll just try reading you some. Just sit quietly and listen. Decide for yourselves instead. When the children went home that evening, some of the poems were remembered very well. Some stayed much longer than expected and are still there, or so I've heard tell.